Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Welcome back to the Stop Overthinking podcast. It's another solo episode. Today, I am going to talk about your thoughts not being facts. This was the very first episode that I ever did of this podcast, so 77 episodes ago. And it is by far the most listened to episode that I have. And sometimes it still has hundreds of listens a week, even a year and a half later. So I want to revisit this topic today because it is so foundational to mindset, the whole concept that thoughts aren't facts. And, the way I've talked about this has evolved a little bit in the past year and a half. So we're coming back and doing a part 2. I have often said before that this concept literally changed my life. This whole idea that thoughts are not facts, that not everything that we think is true. And that has become the foundation of most everything that I will teach you, tell you, and coach you on. And I will say that this idea, this concept, just about broke my brain when I first heard it. Your thoughts are not all facts. And of course, I kind of recognized that it might not be true, but there are things that we have thought and believed and heard for so long that anything else just doesn't even occur to us. Just a quick revisit. The first time I heard about this idea, I was listening to a podcast from the Life Coach School, where I later went on to get my coaching certification. It was around Christmas time in 2018. I was in Florida with my dad, my 2 kids for the holiday season. That year I had been divorced and my mom died. My dad and I were at a complete loss. We didn't even want to try and recreate Christmas. So we just hopped on a plane and did something completely different. So one morning I was out walking around. I don't even know how I found this podcast. Maybe it was karma. Maybe the podcast found me. And it was talking about being able to solve any problem. And I was like, yay, great. I have all sorts of problems here. And I was feeling depressed, anxious, all the things. So in my mind, I had a lot of problems. And I thought, bring it on. Tell me how to solve all the problems. What I heard in that podcast was that the root of our problem is that the way that we think about it is the problem. And that was not what I wanted to hear, but I kept listening. And that essentially began my whole entire journey with mindset coaching. So we know that we have tens of thousands of thoughts every single day. And according to dictionary.com, I'm just going to define what a thought is. It's the act of thinking about or considering something. It's an idea or opinion or a set of ideas about a particular subject. So even right there, it's talking about, an idea or an opinion. And most of us will agree that ideas and opinions aren't necessarily factual. So we have up to 60,000 thoughts a day, and so many of them are subconscious, which is actually great because our brains are busy enough. Here's what happens though. That thought or that sentence enters our mind, and then we filter it through our past experiences, our childhood, our cultural and societal expectations. We have all of these filters that everything goes through, and then we give it meaning. So it's not about what's actually happening, but the way that we think about it, the meaning that we give it, that will essentially create more thoughts. And we know our thoughts generate feelings, gives us actions, and then that's how we show up. That's our behavior. So our thoughts directly create the results that we get and how we experience our lives and how we show up in the world. Our thinking is important. And if you have been listening to this podcast, you likely already know that. You might hear the cliche, mindset is everything. I'm saying yes. And here's how we need to be more intentional about that. As I dug into this whole concept, and you know that my type of coaching is that the cause of what we're making a problem is not really the results or what we see, but it's our thoughts that led us to that point. Your thinking is what's creating your current life and your current reality. I know it can be a lot to think about, but stay with me. One of the very first things that I do with a new client, usually one of our very first sessions, is that we start talking about separating facts from thoughts. And what you do is you take anything that's going on in your life, anything that you're going through, and you separate out the facts from the thoughts. That seems easy enough because we know facts then are defined as being provable in a court of law. They have to be something that everyone would agree on. There aren't any adjectives or describing words with it. So saying something like, my partner doesn't do enough around the house is not a fact. Even if you have 100 people to agree with you, enough is subjective. You're describing something that's subjective. It's not fact. If your partner didn't bring the garbage to the curb for pickup day, that is a fact. It's an action that did not happen. But the way that you're interpreting it is that they're not doing enough. And that part is the thought. The fact they didn't bring the garbage to the curb is the fact. And it isn't a problem until it filters through your brain and you give it meaning and have a different thought about it. It becomes a problem when you, one, knew about it, because when you didn't know about it, it wasn't a problem. So you knew about it, you start thinking about it. And that's what creates the problem for you. You have feelings about it, you act a certain way, but it's all based on the thought about the factual thing. What I love about this concept and knowing this is that we get to take some control by recognizing and owning our thoughts on this process. And you get to have more control over what that problem is and what the problem isn't. You are making it mean something like they're unreliable. They don't listen to me. They don't care about me. I have to do everything. Those thoughts are a problem. And I'm not saying that that's the wrong way to think, just that that is creating a problem for you. So if you're listening to this and you're rolling your eyes and you're like, okay, just stay with me here, because what you get to see is that you have the power to interpret things a lot of different ways, perhaps even any way you want. And that in and of itself is so powerful and can help you solve or minimize or lessen problems. So let's go back to our partner not taking out the garbage. And let's say they did do it intentionally just because they didn't want to. It still isn't a problem until you interpret it and then have thoughts about it and make it mean something for you, right? Because my neighbor's partner who didn't take out the garbage, how I think about it and how that person thinks about it is completely different. So it's not a problem in and of itself. It's how we are interpreting it. When you consider that your thoughts may not be true, it gives you back all of your emotional responsibility. And that is a really good thing, because if you're upset about something and it's because the way that you're thinking about it, it's because of what you're making it mean, anyone can do whatever they want to you. And you get to decide how you want to feel about it, how you want to show up. It becomes a choice for you. And choice is powerful. The way you think about it determines whether it is even a problem or how big of one it is. You get ownership instead of someone else being able to dictate how you're thinking and feeling. One place where I still really struggle with thoughts not being facts is with thoughts about myself. I have an easier time with factual items or things with other people. But when it comes to my body or how I think about myself, I am still my own worst critic. And it's gotten better, but this is still a place where I struggle. So another example here, when we're thinking more personal types of things. Let's say I look in the mirror and I think my stomach is flabby, that it should be flatter. Those are my thoughts. Okay, my stomach is flabby, and then it probably is going on, because this is how my brain works, that in order to be fit and healthy and attractive, that my stomach should be essentially flat and not round, not curved. So is this an actual problem? How I think about my body, it has no bearing on you, right? But the problem is how I'm interpreting this. So all of my filters, my past experiences, my ideas of societal norms about what a body should look like, and my own experiences growing up in the competitive dance and cheer world about what bodies should look like, which is just not the healthiest sort of thing. So I'm creating a problem for myself in the sense that I'm wrong, my body is wrong, it's the wrong shape, that sort of thing. For other people with the same exact shape, looking back at this reflection in the mirror, maybe it's not a problem. It is a problem for me, if I make it a problem, because of how I'm thinking about it. That same reflection, I could look at it and be like, I feel great in my body. I don't care what the scale says. I feel healthy. I could say, my body carried 2 children and I'm 47 years old and I love what my body can do. And it's not a problem. Or I can look at this reflection in the mirror and be like, I have no control over food. I can't lose weight. I don't like the way I look. And those thoughts make it seem wrong. Therefore, it becomes a problem for me. It's the same reflection in the mirror, the same body measurements. But the way that I choose to think about it, or that you choose to think about your own body or yourself, will determine whether or not it's a problem for you and how you feel about it. Because the thing with thoughts is there are so many of them. We're bombarded with images and sounds and people and media on a daily basis. And our brain tries to be efficient and make sense of all of that, running it through all of our filters. And it's trying to be efficient because it's running our whole complex body. But because it's happening so fast and subconsciously, we don't notice where these thoughts and beliefs come from. And a thought just floats through your mind and it's just there. And most of us were not raised to question our own thinking. Like we critiqued other people's ideas and books and things in school. We wrote persuasive essays, but it wasn't so much about questioning and challenging our own thinking. And it's really important. And we want to take ownership of it, not blame it on other people and allow them and what they're doing to control our feelings and our thoughts and how we show up in the world, right? So we want to take agency. When this thought floats through our mind, it's just there. So here's our awareness. It's key. Your thoughts, you can almost think of it like a Google search. So there's a topic. Let's take a new one. Your coworker arrives generally 10 to 15 minutes late in the morning. If you type this in and search for it, you're going to get hundreds, if not thousands of results. And there's going to be all sorts of opinions on the topic. Just like Google, your brain wants to be efficient. So while it could have hundreds of options, it's going to go to that history and use the last thought that makes sense. And a lot of times we don't question it. You just accept that thought and move on. And that's where thoughts become habits. It doesn't make them more correct. It just makes it a habit and what your brain pulls up the most quickly. There are still lots of other possibilities, but we want to be efficient and not deal with them. So in reality, is the person arriving late really a problem for you? It can be if you want to make it one. Or you can just notice this person arrived at this time and go on with your day. If it's bothering you, you need to ask why. Like, what is it making it mean? Are you envious of the fact that they are showing up later and you want to be able to show up later? Is it empathy because you know that they have all sorts of other things that they have to do in the morning? So how we are thinking about it is going to determine whether we think about it again and whether or not it's a problem. I think knowing that our thoughts are the real problem is a good thing because then we have the power to change our thoughts and that changes how we feel and ultimately how we show up. And I love this for me and for you, because if thoughts are the problem, and I have the power to change my thoughts, which changes how I feel and how I act, great. Again, I'm not at the mercy of other people, and I have power and control over the things in my life that impact me. Initially, the whole idea of just being able to change my thoughts or minimize problems with my thinking blew my mind. And being able to change your thoughts and pivot your thinking is a really important skill I'm not really talking about it in this podcast, but if you go back to episode 24 from September of 23, that's all about changing your thoughts. Today, I just really want to reiterate the concept of mindset and how it works, to be aware of your thoughts and to recognize that just because you think it doesn't mean that it's true. Just because you think it doesn't mean it's the only way to think or that there aren't other thoughts that are also true. In this journey, I discovered a lot of people, just like me, think that problems are outside of themselves. It's the circumstance, it's the other person, it's the coworker, it's the partner, it's the ex-husband, it's that groceries are too expensive, it's all of these other things. And when we are thinking that way, we lose control over solving the problem. If it's somebody else fully creating the problem, then you're reactionary or a victim to it. And solving it is out of our hands. So being able to recognize that our thoughts determine whether something is a problem for us and how big it is, that we're the co-creator of this problem, that's a starting point. That our thoughts aren't necessarily true. Knowing that you're part of the situation, you can recognize that you have options. And that takes you out of that black and white thinking that this is the only way to think. You recognize I have choices, and it opens up your creativity and your wisdom. So we want to notice our thoughts, notice and intentionally label them as thoughts. So back to our coworker arriving 10 to 15 minutes late, we would say, I'm thinking my coworker is irresponsible because he is constantly late. Or I'm thinking that my partner should do more around the house. And then notice what the facts are. Facts are the words that were said, not the tone of voice or the body language and how you're interpreting them. The facts are the concrete actions, the time that the person walks in the door, where the garbage is or is not. For me, when I was able to separate out my thoughts from facts by asking questions like, is this really true? And even if I'm convinced this is true, what else could be true? Because there's usually at least one other thing that is a little bit different. When I did that, it just opened up so many possibilities for me. Another question that I use a lot is, why do I choose to think this way? And let me tell you, that can be a frustrating one because I'm right away inserting my responsibility. Why am I choosing to think about it this way? And sometimes, honestly, I still just want to stomp my feet and be like, because that's just the way it is. But I've made great strides forward in this. And what I noticed is this was a huge shift for me, not just when I looked in the mirror, but parenting. And I went from being impatient and set on things being done my way to being calmer and more confident in my decisions. I wasn't second guessing things or trying to get other people's opinions before I made decisions, right? Because I was just recognizing like, hey, that's just a thought. I can do this. I've also noticed that I'm a better listener. And that overall created a whole different dynamic with all of my relationships. I'm able to also enjoy some of the little things instead of my brain just going all the time, because I can be like, oh, I don't need that thought right now. And I labeling it a thought and it's just gone. Instead of it going spinning back and forth, creating a problem out of nothing. With practice, I have a completely different focus overall. I can pause. I can respond to situations instead of reacting, instead of yelling, instead of telling other people what to do, passive aggressively or nicely. I'm not saying things that ultimately I probably regret later or they would have been overthinking later. So my thought work journey continues today in all aspects of my life, because you can use this in your work, career, your future goals, your friendships, parenting, personal relationships, family relationships. And for me, it's like a muscle. You're exercising your brain muscle, so to speak, and it gets stronger and faster, but there's always ways to continue working it and growing it if you so choose. So I'm still human, right? I have big feelings, and there's times I get attached to my thoughts that seem really true. And that's why I still work with a coach to help me see my blind spots as well. But overall, this idea that thoughts are not facts completely changed my life. That idea allows me to have fewer problems or to be able to solve them in a way that is more practical and makes sense for me. And this doesn't mean that you don't have problems, right? But again, it opens up your creativity when you can get out of thinking this is the only way to think about it you get into a problem-solving mode for the things that truly are problems, and you're able to shut it down when your brain likes to start overthinking things and creating problems of things that do not need to be problems. So if this idea is new to you, I just ask you to consider, what if it's true? What if all your thoughts are not facts? What if the things that you believe, you've been conditioned to believe, what if they aren't all facts? What if you could feel differently if you knew how to shift your thinking? What would you do differently? Because all of that is. So have a great week, my friends. Keep noticing and labeling your thoughts so that you can eventually pivot to thinking and showing up more intentionally. I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.